Good evening, everybody. My name is Dave Eldon. Joining me is Dalton Grimes, and
What's up,
tonight
everyone?
we have got a special treat for everybody tonight. And,
I think every night's a special treat for you, David.
Well, you caught me. You caught me. I really like the rules, and I really like talking about Magic stuff. So yeah, we're talking about some special Magic stuff tonight, and we're going to be doing an episode on triggered abilities. This is a very fun and exciting topic for everybody, and I hope everybody has as much fun as I do tonight talking about these. So triggered abilities is a very important part of the game. Obviously, a lot of triggered abilities in Magic's history. So let's just dive right in, right? Okay. So triggered abilities. Let's first and foremost, what is a triggered ability? How would you recognize one if you saw one?
So,
pop up on the screen.
For example, at the beginning of our show, David Eldon says we have a special treat for you.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Triggered abilities are special types of abilities in Magic that occur when an event happens.
When an event happens.
A lot of times this could be, when a creature enters the battlefield, at the beginning of an upkeep, or whenever a creature dies. So I used your 3 hints there for you. Triggered abilities contain one of the following words.
Yes.
When, whenever, or at.
Yes, those 3 words are the characteristic templating, is what I like to call it, of triggered abilities.
Ooh, that's so fancy.
Yeah, I like to make up fancy stuff because the rules don't have enough fancy made up words in them yet. So I made some of my own up. So yeah, those are the characteristic templating of triggered abilities. If you see one of those 3, you know it's a triggered ability, at, when, or whenever. If you don't see any of those 3, it's not a triggered ability. So what would be an example of something that was not a triggered ability?
Well, I believe that blue-white players are coming to the forefront right now. A lot of blue-white in Modern.
Yeah,
I talk about Modern a lot because that's my
There's
default
about
format.
to be now that a certain format of Planeswalker.
He might have something to do with it. You're Jason the Hole.
Yeah.
So Hallowed Fountain, or any of these shocklands that we see from Ravnica.
I like blue-white.
So Hallowed Fountain, whenever it enters the battlefield, you can pay 2 life and it enters untapped, right?
No.
No?
That's not how it works at all.
It's not?
No,
but
it says
that's how we
as
play
Hallowed
it.
Fountain enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. It doesn't say when, and that's important because if you read carefully, you'll notice that Hallowed Fountain does not use any of the 3 characteristic templating words for triggered abilities, and that makes sense because if this was a triggered ability, then when you played it, the triggered ability would go on the stack, and you could respond to it by activating other abilities, for example, tapping it for mana. So it wouldn't really come into play tapped in that case. You'd just be able to respond to the thing that taps it. So that's why stuff like this has to not be a triggered ability. It's a replacement effect.
I've never actually looked at it, but the art on Hallowed Fountain there, that is beautiful.
Yeah?
I've only ever seen the card, and I just think, oh, big obelisks, whatever. But that is pretty.
I like the original artwork better, but I'm a kind of an old school.
You're an elitist.
Well, I was playing when that set came out, and then
Yes.
Ascension first came out.
Return to Ravnica was right before I started.
Yeah, so everybody always has these nostalgic attractions for the original. Now here's an interesting fact. If you look at the original printing for Hallowed Fountain, it makes it more clear that it's a replacement effect, and the reason for that is because it used the word instead, unlike the current printing. So look up the OG version of it, and it actually is slightly different wording. They changed how replacement effects worked, so they changed the templating a little bit.
But nonetheless, it was never an activated or never a triggered ability.
Never.
Will not be a triggered ability.
Nope.
So that's a great way to recognize it. Is even if it seems like it might be a triggered ability, look for those words: when, whenever, or at.
Yeah. So we'll definitely give you guys some examples throughout the day of each of those different types of triggered abilities, because we got a lot of exciting examples ready for you.
There is plenty. We'll be going pretty quick through
this
episode.
Oh boy, did I have a lot of exciting examples cooked up for you.
And if you have any questions in chat, feel free to let us know. We'll do our best to answer them and get you a satisfactory answer.
We love answering questions in the chat because that's questions that we didn't have to think of. It just came up naturally.
Yeah, see if you can throw a wrench in our machine. We'll try.
Okay, so let's talk about identifying some triggered abilities.
Okay.
Here's a card, and I want you to see if it has a triggered ability or not. This is a card called Will Breaker. Is Will Breaker's ability a triggered ability?
So I'll look at that text there. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes the target of a spell or ability you control, gain control of that creature for as long as you control Willbender.
Yeah.
So this
It's
box
Will
attack-
Breaker.
or Will Breaker.
Yeah,
I'm
there's,
sorry.
There's another card called
There
Will
is.
Bender, completely different.
Yeah, you gotta. Your will can break. Your will can bend.
I'm
It's
so
not the
glad
same.
those weren't standard at the same time. That would be a lot of deck
Oh
problems.
my gosh,
deck
that'd be
list problems.
horrible. Well, either way, its text box begins with the word whenever. So
Yes.
this is a triggered ability.
Yes. So
And
that
a fun
was
one, too.
Yeah, it is. It was really great in limited. Here's another card that was in limited with it, and if you got both of these in play, whoo boy,
You had some.
that was a combo, as they say. So the equipped creature getting +2/+0. That is obviously not a triggered ability. That's a static ability.
not
And the
bad.
equip 2 also not a triggered ability. That's an activated ability. But the middle one, the whenever equipped creature attacks, you may sacrifice Throw a Knife. If you do, Throw a Knife deals 2 damage to target creature or player. That is a triggered ability. Again, it uses the word whenever. And this was a really sweet combo because what you could do was
Tell me why. Tell me why, David.
Yeah.
Tell me the rules.
So the way that Will Breaker would work is that anytime you targeted something with a spell or ability, you'd steal that creature, right? So
Yeah.
with this, you don't have to sacrifice it in order to target something. The ability targets something every turn, no matter whether you sacrifice it or not. So if you had the Throw Knife and the Will Breaker, you could attack with Throw Knife creature and then target one of their creatures and then choose not to sacrifice the Throw Knife, but you still targeted their creature. So that still counted for Will Breaker, so you'd still steal their creature. And you'd steal every turn you'd steal something.
Do you think that R&D realized that? When they were plotting this?
I'd say that there's a chance because, like, if you look at a modern day version of this type of effect, like for example the Heart Piercer Mana Core, you can see what they did in the modern version. Now the thing that happens after you sacrifice it, you don't target at all unless you actually did sacrifice, because that's an entire separate triggered ability. These are called reflexive triggered abilities. They just came out with these in Amonkhet block. And so now they have like an updated template that fixes the kind of throwing knife problem where it doesn't make sense that you would be targeting something every turn with the throwing knife, whether you were going to sacrifice it or not. So now we have an updated template that they're making cards with that only targets something if you actually are sacrificing the throwing knife or the creature with Heart Piercer Mana Core.
And thank goodness.
Yeah, I mean, like that was a sweet interaction, but it was a little less sweet if you didn't have the Will Breaker or like some way to get rid of it.
Or if you were on the other side of the table.
Yeah, it was pretty dumb. It was pretty dumb.
Awesome.
So let's talk about how triggered abilities work now. So
Okay.
right, like the way it works is when you have a triggered ability, it's gonna trigger whenever the appropriate thing happens in the game.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that's in the clause that says at win or whatever. So like
Sure.
at the beginning of your upkeep, when this enters the battlefield, whenever this creature attacks. Those things are like the trigger event. So anytime the trigger event happens, the game will like write a little note somewhere on a whiteboard and be like, okay, this triggered ability triggered and it's waiting to go on the stack.
For every game of Magic you play, there are little fairies flying around the table,
not-
all invisible. They have these whiteboards just writing down the rules.
Yeah, exactly how that works. On Moto,
That's the magic part.
On Moto, they're actually gremlins and not fairies, but same difference.
Potato.
Right. So every time the game checks for state-based actions, after that happens, the game checks to see if there's any triggered abilities on the whiteboard, and if there is, then it like erases them off the whiteboard and puts them on the stack.
Sure.
And so that's the way that triggered abilities work. Triggered abilities can trigger anytime, but they don't actually go on the stack until specific times, which is any time a player would get priority, basically. If a player would get priority, the game checks for state-based actions, and then it checks to see if there's any triggered abilities on the whiteboard, and then it puts all the ones from the whiteboard onto the stack. So we can take a look at some kind of interesting consequences of that. So let's say that you're an evil reanimator player.
Okay.
And you have Elishnorn, the Grand Cenobite, in play, right?
She's
so
pretty swell.
all your creatures are getting +2/+2, and all mine are getting -2/-2, right?
Good.
Right. So
That's how your creatures should be, David.
now I'm gonna play Eternal Witness, and I'm gonna get some card back. But unfortunately,
That's a 2/1, David.
I didn't realize it was a 2/1 when I went to play it. So obviously, when my Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, it's gonna have less than 0 toughness on the battlefield, so it's gonna immediately die. So I didn't realize that. Can I get my Eternal Witness back? Like with the Eternal Witness ability, can I get the Eternal Witness back?
So, like David mentioned, triggered abilities are ones that will go onto the stack the next time that a player would receive priority.
Yes.
So, as we know from being judges, we haven't really covered this on the show yet. State-based actions.
Maybe sometime in the future.
Maybe. State-based actions will check to see before a player receives priority all the effects that it needs to deal with. So, for example, Eternal Witness with an Elishnorn on my side of the battlefield will be a 0, -1 creature. State-based actions will send this to the graveyard before any player receives priority.
Yes.
And then our trigger is going to go onto the stack.
Yes.
So by the time that triggered ability goes on the stack and must choose its target, Eternal Witness is already in the graveyard.
Yes. And so because Eternal Witness is in the graveyard at the time that the triggered ability is going onto the stack, when the time comes for me to choose targets for that triggered ability, which is a part of the process of putting it on the stack, I will be able to choose Eternal Witness to bring itself back. So that's a kind of a sweet trick. And so hopefully you guys don't need to know that trick, because you'll just remember that Eternal Witness is getting -2/-2. But if that were to happen to you, then you'd have like somewhere to go.
Maybe you need like some creature enter the battlefield effects.
Yeah. Thragtusk is a good one. Thragtusk has some creature.
Yeah, so even though the Eternal Witness in that situation would be immediately sent to the graveyard, it would still trigger any other enter the battlefield effects for a creature. So.
Yeah, any creature enters the battlefield stuff.
Maybe that was part of your strategy there, David. I don't know.
Possible.
You're just a bad player.
Possible. Okay, so that's kind of how triggered abilities work. Any questions in the chat about how this example functions, or any of our other examples that we talked about? Now would be a great time to ask them before we go on to our next exciting question that I have prepared for everybody.
Oh boy, is it exciting!
So it is kind of exciting. This is like one of my like pet questions, right? Like every rules person I feel has like certain pet cards that they like asking questions about, because they're kind of like doesn't make a lot of sense maybe. So this is one of them. Like this is my one of my favorite angels in Magic, the Archangel of Thune. And so this has a triggered ability, of course. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And you notice that this has life link, so obviously when I deal damage to the opponent, then that causes me to gain life, so I get a counter on everything. The question is this: let's say I have 2 of these. Let's say I have 2 Archangel of Thunes.
You bet.
They both attack, go through unblocked. It's a made-up magic. Right. I can pronounce it however I want. So yeah, I have 2 Archangel of Thunes, no blocking. What happens? How many +1/+1 counters do I get?
So Archangel of Thune, if we have both of them, they will both have this triggered ability of whenever you gain life.
Yes.
So in this case, even though the Archangels are going to do damage together at the same time in the game, there are 2 sources each gaining you life from lifelink.
Yes.
As such, each one will gain you life, and we'll see those as separate instances of life gain. So for this purpose, we'll call them Archangel A and Archangel B. We'll order it so Archangel A will do its damage at the same time. However, Archangel A will trigger itself, and then it will also trigger Archangel B.
Yes.
Archangel B will also do damage, triggering Archangel A and itself.
Yes.
So those of you who bore with me through that that is going to be 4 instances of this trigger going onto the stack.
Yeah.
2 from each angel, each doing damage. So at the end of this, you're going to have 4 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control.
That's pretty big
And
time.
I don't know about you, but a flying lifelink 7/8 sounds pretty swell.
It's pretty good. So this is kind of an interesting thing. You have to read the trigger conditions really carefully in order to know how many times is the appropriate number of times for it to trigger, because
That is very true.
a lot of them are worded kind of similarly, and it looks like it might be one, but it might be a different one. So with this one here, there's actually a specific rule in the CR that says effects that say whenever you gain life mean whenever a source causes you to gain life. So there's actually a specific rule in the CR. Now, how about this triggered ability? This is Ripjaw.
When you say that, I have a feeling you're going somewhere here.
I mean, maybe. So like here's another very similar seeming
Standard All-Star, you got it.
Yeah,
Ripjaw
Raptor. So let's say that I have the Ripjaw Raptor.
You do? Sure.
And I attack with it, and you double block.
Yeah.
Okay, how many cards do I draw?
I don't want you to draw cards. So I'll block it with 2 creatures.
Yeah.
Each will do damage.
Right.
So this was pretty important when Ixalan came out with the Enrage trigger.
Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of important because
yeah.
it's still in standard right now.
Exactly. But it came to the forefront, really,
Yeah,
I would say. It became a topic that people needed to know. And although I will have 2 sources dealing damage to Ripjaw Raptor,
Yes.
since they are both doing so in the combat damage step, it will only trigger Enrage once.
Yes. So this is completely different from Archangel of Thune before. There isn't a special rule in the CR that says that whenever this is dealt damage means whenever a source deals damage to this. This is literally exactly what you get, and so because all the combat damage gets dealt in one instance, then there's only going to be one instance of Ripjaw Raptor getting dealt damage, and so there's only going to be one trigger from the Enrage trigger, not 2. Even though it's kind of a similar seeming situation to the first one, it's not. It's actually completely different.
Yes, because a flying 7/4 or a 7/8 is not that big a deal.
Yeah.
But you drawing 2 cards is just absurd.
So like another place where you're going to see this come up is becomes blocked triggers. So Ichor Claw Mirror says whenever Ichor Claw Mirror becomes blocked, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Something different would be something different would be like a Cave Tiger. A Cave Tiger, whenever a creature blocks it, the modern template it says whenever Cave Tiger becomes blocked by a creature, Cave Tiger gets +1/+1 until end of turn.
That it
so
does.
these are 2 different wordings, and because of the change in wording, if you double block the Ichor Claw Mirror, it only became blocked 1 time, so the trigger is only going to happen once. But if you double block the Cave Tiger, it became blocked by a creature twice, which means that its triggered ability is going to happen 2 times.
You bet. Now I got a good question for you, and I'm going to throw
do
my
it.
wrench in here.
Let's do it.
Brimaz, King of Oreskos. Oreskos, I want to say.
Yeah, it'd be really great if we could come up with the right way to spell this first try. That was excellent from our flavorologist here.
So you have your Cave Tiger, the 2/2,
Yeah.
when it comes blocked by a creature, it gets +1/+1. And I block it with Brimaz.
Yes.
How many triggers do you get?
All right. So this is kind of an interesting thing. It says you whenever it blocks a creature, you put a
Triggered
1/1
abilities and triggered abilities.
Yeah. You put a 1/1 Cat Soldier token onto the battlefield, blocking that same creature. So even though it got put onto the battlefield blocking Cave Tiger, Cave Tiger didn't. It doesn't count as like becoming blocked by the creature, because this creature is not the thing that happened doesn't match what Cave Tiger is looking for, which is Cave Tiger is attacking and a creature transitions from not blocking it to blocking it. So with the token from Brimaz's ability, you never declared it as a blocking creature, so the game doesn't see it as Cave Tiger becoming blocked by that creature. So that's kind of a weird one. But that's how that works.
Pretty fun interaction, though.
Yeah, I actually had
Surprise cat.
I actually had to look that style of ruling up at a recent PPTQ that I judged.
Very exciting.
So that was one that I did not know off the top of my head with 100% certainty. So I had to pull out the old CR.
Last PPTQ I worked, I think I had 2 calls.
Yeah.
And it was pretty bland.
Yeah. So.
But that meant the people were doing the right thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Never a bad thing.
So. All right, let's talk about some different types of triggered abilities.
Yes.
We talked about like one style of triggered ability. Now this is kind of a special one, right? So this is a card it's not legal to play in Modern yet.
Yet. Well, if Jace can get in,
I mean, when they reprint Karakas, then surely we're gonna have access to this thing. But then it'll be a lot less broken.
Man, I'm so excited for Dominaria. I want to see what happens.
I'm excited too. I'm excited mostly for Jason Modern though, so we'll see what happens with that. But this is neither here nor there. This is the ice counter menace.
This is legacy.
Yeah, this is strictly legacy playable here. So it has a triggered ability. You notice.
Sure.
Obviously the last ability, the one that we're referring to, Wind Dark Depths, has no ice counters on it. Now this is kind of an interesting triggered ability, right? Because let's think about this for a second. Let's think logically about how this would work. Let's say this has no trigger, or this has no ice counters on it. Okay, so this triggered ability is going to trigger.
You bet.
Yeah, and then because players get priority to respond to triggered abilities, I'm going to get priority.
Yes, you will.
To respond to that.
If you're an active player, yeah.
Okay, so but that's a problem. Because when the game is going to give me priority, we know that part of the process of doing that is the game checks to see if there's any triggered abilities that have triggered.
Yep.
And look, it still has no ice counters on it, right?
Yeah, you're right. So let's put it on the stack.
So let's put that on the stack, and before I can get priority to respond to that one, hey, look, the whiteboard has conditions.
Yeah, it's right on the whiteboard there.
It's right up there.
They're not erasing it.
Yeah,
those gremlins aren't doing anything.
Yeah, so it just keeps stacking up forever and ever until the game is
it's like the world's worst Jenga game.
Yeah, so obviously that's not how it works. But if we're just thinking with what we've talked about so far, then yeah, that would be how it works. And so
I'll play my Dark Depths and end the game.
Yeah, Dark Depths, get down to 0 counters, it's a draw. So
well, that's not how it works. Thank goodness.
It's not. And Dalton, would you like to explain to us what actually happens and why that is the case?
Yes. So Dark Depths here is what we consider to be a state trigger.
State trigger, not a state-based action.
Not a state-based action, not a state-based trigger. It is a state trigger.
Yeah.
And what this means is that this trigger of this ability is looking for a certain state in the game to be met, a condition that it wants to see met.
Yes.
In this case, this state trigger is that Dark Depths has 0 ice counters on it. Has no ice counters on it.
Yes.
So this could be because we removed it. This could be because we cloned it with Thespian Stage. Whatever reason, got rid of them with Vampire Hexmage.
Or just use the ability, the 3 ability 10 times.
10 times. Have you ever seen anyone do that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, I have not.
No, because like what'll happen is like the lands games, they'll get really stalled out.
That's true.
And so like you'll see people starting to take the counters off, and then like eventually you might. There's a chance that they get down to 0 before they draw the Thespian Stage. Usually they draw the Thespian Stage first.
Well, nonetheless, we'll get back to the rules here. So when Dark Depths has no ice counters, this ability is going to go onto the stack, as David mentioned.
Yeah.
With a state trigger, as we talked about, this state will be met every time a player is going to receive priority.
Yes.
So state triggers have a special rule that once their conditions are met, they do not trigger again until that ability resolves.
Or leaves the stack
leaves the stack in some other way.
Yeah. So for example, like let's say you have a Stifle. Stifle is a sweet magic card. Counters target triggered ability. So if you Stifle the Dark Depths state trigger, then it'll be countered.
It's here on the stack, and then it's gone off the stack.
But the next time a player would get priority, the magic whiteboard has some triggered abilities on it that need to get put on the stack now.
Yes. So is stifling a Dark Depths trigger legal?
Yeah, for sure. No problem.
Is it a smart choice?
Probably want to stifle the Thespian Stage activation or the Vampire Hexmage activation.
Or the
that might
ice
be-
counter activation.
Yeah, or the -1 ice counter activated ability. Yeah, that'd be
So these state conditions, or these state triggers, will keep going onto the stack until either they're removed from the stack or they resolve. So
Yeah.
Dark Depths, as long as it has no ice counters on it, it will trigger until that ability resolves.
yes.
So if you stifle it, if you cancel it, or not cancel, disallow it,
Yeah.
it'll just keep coming back.
Yeah.
It's awful.
But yeah, as long as the game state doesn't change, then it'll keep on triggering. And because that's how state triggers work, we have to have a special rule that says if it's on the stack, then it won't trigger and go on the stack again. The game will ignore that one and wait until it isn't on the stack anymore. So that's how those work. It's kind of an interesting one. Here's another kind of interesting. I like this this rule here. This is kind of standard triggered ability. Whenever another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gains Intimidate until end of turn.
That's not standard legal.
No, it sure isn't. It might look like it is based on the I guess the expansion.
The fact that it's a vampire.
Yeah, it's a vampire, and the expansion symbol kind of looks about right. But
As we know, all vampires in Magic are from Ixalan.
yeah, that's about right. So here's another card that's not standard. All creatures are black, right? So like if we have this Darkest Hour in play, and then we also have the Shadow Alley Denizen.
Yep, you bet.
And then I play like some Grizzly Bear or something that's not a black creature, right? Do I get the triggered ability from Shadow Alley Denizen?
Oh, but wait.
What?
It's black.
Yeah.
It's a black bear.
Yeah, it's black now. So this is kind of interesting the way this works. So because of how continuous effects work, there's no time when Grizzly Bear is on the battlefield that it isn't black. So immediately after anything happens in the game is going to look and see, okay, is there any triggered abilities that need to go on the stack, that need to go on the whiteboard so that we can put them on the stack eventually. And anytime something happens in the game, the gremlins or the fairies are going to look around and they're going to see if anything matches the trigger condition. And so when Grizzly Bears enters the battlefield, the gremlins are going to look around. It's like, hey, look, it's a black creature.
You bet.
Black creature entered the battlefield. Shadow Alley Denizen has a triggered ability that talks about that. So
Throw it on the stack.
Right on the whiteboard. And then eventually put it on the stack.
Yep.
So that is, in fact, how that will work. There is not a time when it isn't black on the battlefield. And so the Grizzly Bear will enter the battlefield as a black creature, and that will cause Shadow Alley Denizen to trigger.
Yep. This is kind of the same idea behind with Blood Moon. Like a Shockland will enter as a mountain. So, same idea there.
Yeah, it's
Not related to triggered abilities, but
Yeah, it's very similar how those work. Okay, so now we're going to talk about another kind of special type of triggered ability.
all right, awesome. I
And,
see you looking at cards there, and I
yeah,
don't know
yeah.
any of them.
Well, you've probably never heard of most of these cards because they're like cards that I picked to make an example here.
Specific purposes.
Right. So here's one that you might need to read. When this is put into a graveyard from play, you gain 3 life.
Sure.
Now this is kind of an interesting type of triggered ability, right?
Is that Invader Zim?
No, it's Anadet Lurker.
I'm pretty certain that's Invader Zim.
I mean, if you look at the face for Atog from this block, it also looks kind of like an Atog. So with this has a triggered ability, and it's kind of an interesting one because let's think about what I just said, right?
Okay.
Anytime something happens in the game, the gremlins or the fairies look around and they see if there's anything that should have triggered based on that,
Sure.
right?
I'm following you.
So if my Anadet Lurker dies, the
Yes.
fairies are going to look around and they're going to see if there's any triggered abilities that should have triggered.
Uh-huh.
Now, that's a problem because abilities only work when the thing that has that ability is on the battlefield. But Anadet Lurker died,
Except for
so
this one.
it's actually in the graveyard right now, so it doesn't have that ability. So there's nothing
Yeah, you
in
bet.
play right now that has the ability, when this dies, you gain 3 life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of interesting, right? Right? Do you gain the 3 life then?
You would
if
think.
if that was how it worked.
You would think that it was interesting.
Yeah, well, I definitely do. This is like exactly the sort of stuff. So this is something called a leaves the battlefield trigger, right?
Yes.
And leaves the
Could
battlefield.
be dying. Could just be
Yeah.
a straight up
All
leaves
kinds of-
the battlefield.
All kinds of stuff.
Anything.
So, unlike stuff like, for example, Erishan Cleric gains you the 3 life just fine.
You bet.
Because
that looks great.
After it enters the battlefield,
You
the
do
fairies
the
are like, hey, look, there's a thing that has a ability that, matches what just happened.
It's on the battlefield. It's do it, write it.
So that works out fine. That works out great. And we know that triggered abilities should only work on the battlefield, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, it wouldn't make sense that if I had a warmth and it was in my graveyard that I should be gaining 2 life every time someone plays a red spell.
Wouldn't
right?
that be so great?
Boy, oh boy. Or if it was in my hand even, who knows, right? So they kind of leave us in an awkward spot here with our boy Anadet Lurker.
Yep.
Because this has a triggered ability that when it's put into the graveyard, then you gain 3 life. So maybe we can.
So what do?
Maybe we can fix this. We can say triggered abilities can work from the graveyard. No problem, right? I mean, we have triggered abilities that work in the graveyard. There's stuff like this Genesis.
Oh, Genesis.
That triggered ability only works when it's in the graveyard, right? So we could definitely do that. But the problem is that there's some other cards in Magic that make that a little bit of a weird one too, right? So like if I unsummon Soul Scourge, right? Soul Scourge when it leaves the battlefield, that player gains 3 life. So this isn't just triggering when it dies. This is any time it leaves the battlefield.
Sure.
So the problem is there's lots of weird triggered abilities, and it only really makes sense if there's some way that the game can look back in time and see that the triggered ability should have worked.
Golly gee, wouldn't that be sweet?
So that's what we do. This is the way these types of triggered abilities function. Is leaves the battlefield triggers and like a bunch of other different types of exceptions. You can look in the CR if you want to see them all. But these types of triggered abilities work because the Squad of Fairies doesn't just look immediately after everything happens in the game. For certain types of triggered abilities, they'll remember that they were in play immediately before the event happened. So the way it actually works is, and this is like ingenious the way Wizards figured this out here. So this is another one of those things where like I kind of geek out a little bit as a rules kind of guy when I figured out that this was how it actually works. So what happens is every time something happens in the game, the Squad of Fairies has to look around to see if there's any triggered abilities that match what just happened. But they don't just look at stuff on the battlefield. For certain specific types of trigger abilities, including leave the battlefield triggers and is put into a graveyard from play, or any types of triggered abilities that are along those style of triggered abilities. For those types, they will look back in time and they will remember what the game state looked like immediately before that game action took place. And so that is the reason why Soul Scourge will gain you the 3 life even if you unsummon it and put it into a hidden zone where the game can't even look at what its text box says anymore because it's in your hand. It's not in the battlefield or in the graveyard even, where it could just like look and see that there's a card with an ability there. So that is kind of ingenious, I think, and I'm really excited about that type of thing. Grafted Wargear, a really sweet Magic card from the Fifth Dawn with Anadet Lurker, his BFF with these leaves the battlefield triggers. Yeah.
Oh boy.
So if I have the Grafted Wargear and I return that to my hand with like a boomerang or something, that the game sees that it became unattached from a creature.
Yep.
And this triggered ability will work. It'll work the way the game intended it to work, because this is another one of those types of triggered abilities where the game can look back in time. So that's kind of sweet. I know that was kind of a lot to take in. Lots of sweet Magic cards that you've probably never heard of before flashing up on screen. Anyone in the chat has any questions at all, we'd sure love to hear them. And if everything was great, then throw a thumbs up, or Dave, keep on talking about bulk comments from Fifth Dawn. Just throw that right in the chat. And
I know that's what you want to hear about.
Oh, goodness me. There's a lot of bulk comments from Fifth Dawn. Let me tell you about Abandon Hope. Once upon a time, I really needed some lands. And so I was abandoning Hope rapidly And so if you've never heard of that one before, we'll bring it up. But it was one of the scry cards, or no, not Abandoned Hope. What was it called? There's some scry card. But anyway, I had to like pump my opponent's creature to get to scry 2, and I still didn't see any lands. So that was so sad.
I've been there before.
Yeah,
the number of times I've ghost quartered my own lands to get myself mana.
You get the,
to get mana.
The color fixing.
I'll be like, man, I need a red land. Ghost quarter. Ugh.
Yeah, the ultimate sacrifice, as they say. All right, so now it's time. I guess now that we've talked about that a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit about how triggered abilities work when there's multiple that need to go on the stack, right? So this is kind of an interesting one. Yeah, there is one kind of an interesting thing here.
Ha ha ha. So
hopefully I spelled this right. Yeah,
it looks like it.
Look at that. So this is our favorite Eldrazi Titan, whatever they're calling this thing. Well, it's my favorite because I play Legacy, right? So like, this is the one that sees play in Legacy every now and then.
He's got some modern there.
Yeah,
good old dubious challenge.
That is dubious, my friend. So look at this triggered ability. We're talking specifically about this last one.
Which one?
There's a couple.
So when Emrakul is put into a graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library.
Yes. All right. So
I noticed something there.
Yes.
A couple extra words in that text.
Yes. So Emrakul says when Emrakul is put into a graveyard from anywhere. Mm-hmm. From anywhere is a special kind of thing that basically tells the fairies, do not look back in time for this triggered ability. Even though it's a leaves the battlefield triggered ability, which usually would mean that you have to look back in time, we're using the term from anywhere, and it's like a magic set of words that if you didn't have someone explain it to you, there's no way you would have come up with this idea by yourself.
No.
But yeah, what that means is that because it says the words from anywhere, that means that it is not treated as a leaves the battlefield trigger. It's treated as a normal trigger, which means that the fairies do not get to look back in time to look at the game state immediately before. They only can look at the game state immediately after something happens to see. So some practical consequences of that would be, like, for example, if you clone an Emrakul and then the clone dies, where does it go? Does it go to your graveyard, or does it end up getting shuffled back into your deck?
It's a good one, and I actually do not know the answer to that.
Right. So we'll just think about it step by step, right?
Yeah. So when Emrakul is put into a graveyard, which for most intents and purposes reads when this card is put into the graveyard from anywhere.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, so that clone is going to be put into the graveyard from anywhere.
Yes.
However, when the clone hits the graveyard, it is not an Emrakul anymore.
That's correct.
Because the trigger reads from anywhere.
Yes.
So I'm going to say it doesn't shuffle.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes. The reason is, just like you said, because this says from anywhere, we cannot treat it as a leaves the battlefield trigger, which means that the fairies who are in charge of figuring out which triggered abilities are supposed to trigger, they cannot look back in time to see that clone had that ability when it was on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. Instead, they look at the game state immediately after, and they see, oh, it's just some clone in a graveyard. Who cares? If it were a real, live, actual Emrakul, then immediately after that event happened, the fairies would look and be like, hey, there's a thing in the graveyard that has a triggered ability, and this is a special type of triggered ability that can function in the graveyard. And it says, hey, look, it got put into a graveyard from anywhere, so we shuffle back in. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's kind of interesting how that works. Be sure to read the cards carefully so you can be privy to those types of interactions.
So you'll find a lot of times triggered abilities really rely on a couple of specific words.
Yes, indeed.
So, like David said, and I will reiterate,
read those friendly
cards.
Read
the words.
Yeah,
those friendly cards.
Yes,
you bet.
Friendly cards.
At, when, whenever, from anywhere, all very relevant.
Yeah. Speaking of
I
Eldrazi,
concede.
Speaking of Eldrazi, here's one that costs a little bit less than 15. You might actually pay the real live legit mana cost of 2 mana for this one. Well, you know,
Sometimes.
Got a couple Eldrazi.
I don't think I ever will, but
Ooh,
my opponents always
for sure. I've played some
My
Emrakul
opponents
for 2
always
mana,
do.
and it was great. It was great. So a couple of triggered abilities on Emrakul's little baby brother here, Thought-Knot Seer. When Thought-Knot Seer enters the battlefield, target player reveals his hand. You choose a non-land card and exile it.
Cool.
And you know, when it leaves the battlefield, then target opponent draws a card. So here is the question. Obviously, those are both triggered abilities.
You bet.
So let's say that I have this other really sweet magic card. This is called Eldrazi Displacer. So I use Eldrazi Displacer's Flicker ability on Thought-Knot Seer.
Yep.
So what happens?
So if we look at this,
Yeah, it exiles Thought-Knot Seer, then returns it to the battlefield tapped.
Yep. So Eldrazi Displacer, unlike some other blinkers, will return it immediately.
Yeah, it's all in one shot.
So this is a one shot, one kill, and that's gonna get it. So Thought-Knot Seer is going to leave.
Yes.
Ability triggers.
Yes.
But
First,
then-
write it on the whiteboard.
Before anyone's gonna get priority, Thought-Knot Seer is going to come back.
Yes.
No one gets priority during the resolution of a spell or ability.
Yeah, so the whiteboard doesn't have a chance to get flushed to the stack.
Correct. So it leaves, and the ability triggers, and then it comes back.
Yeah.
So now we have both of these triggers
They're both on there.
written on the whiteboard, but kind of just like right on top of each other.
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
which way do you order
Yeah,
them?
they're both on there, and they both need to go on the stack, but we need to pick an order for them to go on the stack, right? So what order would that be? So logically, you would say, okay, well, obviously it left the battlefield first, and then it entered the
So we'll
battlefield.
throw
So
that,
those
and then
that
we'll do
should
the
be the
honors.
order. But that doesn't really work as well for some other situations that come up.
Yep.
So that's not actually what we do.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense for this specific thing, but I could come up
But-
with another example where it wouldn't make sense.
I
Like, for
guarantee he
example-
has at least 3 other examples.
Well, I mean, like it's not hard to think of one. Like let's say our Wrath, right? Like
Okay.
I play a Wrath of God,
Yep.
and it destroys all creatures. And there's multiple creatures that have a leaves the battlefield trigger, right? Like
Oh,
all those creatures left the battlefield at the same time, right? So
Yes, they did.
So you know, how would we say this one should be ahead of this one, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. So because of that, that's not how it works. You don't just go based on the order that they got written on the whiteboard. What you do is you show the whiteboard to each player, the active player first, and then the non-active players in turn order, and all of those players take all of their own triggered abilities and put them on the stack in whatever order they want. So that's pretty simple. So in this case, with Eldrazi Displacer plus Thought-Knot Seer, that means that I can choose to have you draw the card and then get a card exiled out of your hand, or I can choose to have you exile a card out of your hand and then draw a card. Either of those isn't a legal way that I can have these 2 abilities get put on the stack. And so because of that, and they both do come up.
and because of that, Thought-Knot Seer is unfair.
Thought-Knot Seer is great. So they both do come up. Usually what you want to do is you want to have them draw the card first and then get a card exiled, because that way if the card that they drew is really threatening, you can exile it, right? But one of your really great win cons against Bridge from Below or Ensnaring Bridge decks is you flicker your Thought-Knot Seer with Eldrazi Displacer, and then you force them to draw the card after you exile, so they end up with a card in hand. So it forces them to draw a card, right? And then they have 1 card in hand, which means you can attack with all your Scion tokens. And so that's one of your like major ways that you can win the bridge decks.
It's pretty sneaky.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't be revealing my tech here, but I guess that's a
Coming
loyal
next week,
readers.
David Eldon deck tech.
Yeah, loyal Dave's deck tech on Ban Eldrazi, the best deck in Modern. # great.
Oh, banned Eldrazi. I thought you said banned Eldrazi.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, we're doing
the
ban
ones
lists.
that we didn't ban yet. The ones that we haven't banned yet. Okay, so that is how we call that the AppNap rule, and we don't have like a special name for it if it's just all one player's triggered abilities, like with the Thought-Knot Seer example. But maybe in the comments we can come up with one.
So AppNap obviously standing for active player, non-active player.
Yeah. So we'll give you guys another chance to look at one where it actually does look like that. So here's a card, Shadows of the Past. Right. Whenever a creature dies, you scry 1. Okay.
Cool.
So you have a Shadows of the Past. Right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Got it.
And I have this awesome, bulk common here, Rune Servitor. When it dies, each player draws a card.
Cool.
Right? So it's your Shadows of the Past, my
Yep.
Rune Servitor.
Okay.
Okay. And you're going to kill my Rune Servitor.
Sounds
what
great.
happens? Do you
So-
draw first or scry first?
So this creature dies, and at this moment on the whiteboard, there will be two things written.
That's right.
One is a creature died, so scry 1 for me.
Yes.
And then the other one is David's trigger, which is Rune Servitor dies, each player draws a card.
Yes.
So those gremlins, those fairies, are going to look at me and they're going to say, hey, you have this trigger. It's when a creature dies, scry 1. I'll say, cool, I'll put that on the stack. And then it goes to the non-active player. In a multiplayer game, this would go around the table clockwise in non-active player order. So this is going to go to David, and it's going to say, hey, you have this trigger to put on the stack.
Yeah.
He's going to say, cool, I'll put that on the stack.
Yeah.
So then when we start to resolve them, his is going to go first. So
Yes.
unfortunately, I don't get a scry before I draw my card.
Now, if you had an instant speed removal spell, you could save it for my turn and then kill it on my turn. Because what would happen in that case is I would be the active player, so I would take my stuff off the whiteboard and put it on the stack first. Which would mean that the Rune Servitor, each player draws a card, would go on the stack on the bottom, and then your scry trigger would go on the stack on top of it, so you'd get to resolve them in a more favorable order for you. So that would be kind of an interesting trick that you could do if you had an instant speed removal spell. You could do it like that.
What do you think of that rule in Magic? The fact that non-active players' stuff resolves first. Fair, not fair, good, not good.
It makes sense, and the reason is because in a multiplayer game, which non-active player would you give the first shot to?
Clockwise, right?
Well, I mean, like
mine would resolve first, then the person there and there.
well, like how would you decide between you and the person sitting next to you which one should have to put them on the stack first? So that's the reason why we have it the way it is, because with the way it is right now, the active player is the natural starting point. There's only one active player, so it's unambiguous who has the first shot, and then from there it's also unambiguous who has each of the next shots because you go in turn order, and there's only one order that the turn order happens in. So because of the way that it's set up, it's completely ambiguous which player should have what the order should be that people put their stuff on the stack.
I just thought that was always a nice little interesting tidbit for Magic.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
like, even if it's your turn, you can have your cake, but you don't gotta eat it too.
Yeah. Of course, there's some trigger.
Your opponent gets a slice.
Yeah, yeah. It's being fair. We're being fair. All right. So, let's see. You wanna talk about some other special types of trigger
Yes.
abilities here?
These triggers are phenomenal.
Oh gosh. This is one of those things where like I didn't really realize until I like made this stuff up. How many great types of trigger abilities there is.
Oh yeah.
You get state triggers, you got like AppNap. Here's the question. The question is the following. I control Felidar Sovereign.
Cool.
And I'm at 39 life,
Yep.
and I'm tapped out. So
Sure.
clearly, like my goal would be to win the game next turn, right?
That's
like
what you wanna
that'd be-
do?
That'd be sweet if I could do that. And I have this life gain spell in my hand. It's an instant, so healing salve or whatever, like instant speed and Sphinx's Rev maybe. So I'm tapped out, so I can't play it now. Can I win the game?
So I'm pretty certain whenever anyone starts playing Commander, their first thought is Felidar Sovereign, 40 life, cool. Felidar Sovereign's a pretty nice card. It can win you the game.
I guess it could.
So David's at 39 life, and what
Yes.
he wants to do is during his upkeep,
Yeah.
with this trigger on the stack, he's going to cast that instant speed Sphinx's Revelation
Yeah.
and gain some life and win the game.
Right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Sounds like a good plan to me, right?
I want to do that. Let's do
Wrong.
it. Oh, why not?
So I'm sorry to burst your bubble here, but there is a very pesky word written on this Felidar Sovereign.
Yeah.
It's not vigilance. It's not lifelink. It is if.
If.
IF. So at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game.
Yes.
So this if creates what we refer to as an intervening if clause. with some very nice air quotes. Thank you, David.
That is a trade term in the rules.
And that, yes,
Intervening
that
if
is a
clause
rule.
is the official name of these things.
It's not the what was the one you penned earlier?
Yeah, it's not characteristic
Characteristic
templating.
templating.
That's something I made up. That's not in the CR anywhere.
Yes. So this is an intervening if clause, and what this means is, unlike a triggered ability which is going to check for its conditions to be met, intervening if clauses check twice. So an intervening if clause is going to require this triggered ability, which it is a triggered ability, I'll clarify. It says at, so we're in the right domain here. So it's going to look at the time that the ability would trigger, as well as upon the resolution of the ability.
Yes.
So what David's hoping for is that the ability would trigger, and then in response to it, he could gain life.
Yeah.
However, due to the rules of intervening if clauses, if David is not at 39 life when this ability would trigger, or sorry, 40 life, if David is at 39, not at 40, when this ability would trigger at the beginning of his upkeep, and you don't gain priority during untap step, this ability does not trigger. So even if David could at instant speed get himself to 40 or more,
Yeah.
he would have to wait till his next go around in order. My apologies, friends. He would have to wait for his next go around for the chance to win with his Felidar Sovereign.
Yeah. So to make things 100% clear here, I can't put the triggered ability on the stack, then respond to it with a life gain spell, because this triggered ability is not even going to go on the stack at all. What's going to happen is the beginning of my upkeep is going to happen, and then the fairies are going to be, hey, oh look, here's a triggered ability that says at the beginning of your upkeep, and then one of the other fairies is going to slap the marker right out of his hand and be like, no, that doesn't happen because he doesn't have 40 life. So it doesn't even go on the stack at all. It doesn't even get, like, when they're writing it on the whiteboard, fairy number 1 is going to be trying to write it down, and fairy number 2 is going to swat the marker out of his hand and be like, nope, that's not going to happen this turn because he didn't have 40 life when this triggered ability was triggering. So
Punk.
no go. Okay, so that's intervening if clause. Here's another question with intervening if clause to give you guys some more experience. This is Abzan Beastmaster, one of my favorite FNM promos. Not really, not as good as some of the other FNM promos that happened around the same time as this particular card, but it's kind of sweet, right? At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if you control the creature with the greatest toughness or tied with the greatest toughness.
Yep, there it is. If I see it.
So this is my only creature, and my opponent has a grizzly bear, and I have a giant growth, and I want to play the giant growth on my Abzan Beastmaster in response to this triggered ability, and so I can get to draw a card this turn.
Yeah, that seems like it would work.
But obviously this has an intervening if clause.
Unfortunately, at your upkeep, you don't control the creature with the biggest power.
Yeah.
So,
is there a problem, Dalton?
For me, so Abzan Beastmaster is interesting.
Interesting meaning dumb.
Meaning it doesn't follow suit.
Yeah, this is not an intervening if clause.
So Felidar Sovereign read at the beginning of your upkeep, if.
Yes.
Abzan Beastmaster does not. Abzan Beastmaster reads at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card.
Yes.
And then comes the if.
Yes.
So even though
Completely
this word
different.
exists within the text, and even though it seems like it should have no relevant meaning or difference,
yeah,
oh boy, it does.
So
this is actually just a standard triggered ability.
This does not have an intervening if clause. And if you knew what the word intervening meant before we started talking about intervening if clauses, like the actual meaning of the word intervening in English kind of gives that away a little bit. Because what it means is it has to be in between.
Mm-hmm.
That's what intervening means. And so because the if clause is not in between the trigger event and the effect for Abzan Beastmaster, it is not an intervening if clause. With Felidar Guardian, the if clause was in between the triggered ability, trigger condition, and the triggered ability effect. And so therefore it would be considered an intervening if clause. And with Abzan Beastmaster, the if clause actually happens at the very end of the triggered ability, so it's not intervening. Because of that, it's perfectly
Post-if clause?
Yeah, it's a post, not a fancy rules term for that, but the way it works then is it just goes on the stack whether or not I have the greatest toughness or tied for the greatest toughness. It goes on the stack every turn, and it's perfectly fine for me to buff its toughness in response, so that I can get up to being the guy with the creature with the greatest toughness. And if I do that, I definitely do get to draw a card. And so completely different from Abzan or from Feldar.
Totally different.
Sovereign, because it's not an intervening if clause. It's an if clause that happens at the very end, which doesn't have a special name.
Yeah, remember when I said that words matter in triggered abilities?
Yeah,
well, so does placement.
Yeah, just a little bit. Now this is one of those things that I feel is kind of dumb. Especially, like, I can't imagine trying to, like, puzzle my way through this stuff if I wasn't a native English speaker. Because I'm certain that the, like, printed versions, like, translated versions of cards, you know, in all the languages, like, I'm sure there's some examples from around the globe of cards that didn't get translated with this specific nuance where it's actually very important.
Yeah. Sometimes you get swamps with skeleton art.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just happens.
So okay, this is another kind of interesting example with intervening if clause. So this is our old friend Elish Norn again. So
can I have her?
Yeah, you can have Elish Norn. Go
awesome.
for it.
I want her.
All right, now
I'm in a good place. Got myself a Praetor.
Now I'm gonna renegade here. And
Renegade Rallier.
I'm gonna renegade Rallier. Yeah, another FNM promo. I love FNMs. And I was really excited to hear that they were coming back. The promos.
I'm very excited about that.
Tokens are sweet, but I like to be able to play my FNM promos and demonstrate to people that they're in the presence of an FNM champion.
See, so the tokens were cool, but I feel like the fact that they printed Fatal Push as the promo right
about
before,
that. Like, I would rather have Abzan Beastmaster than
so they printed Fatal Push, which is, you know, standard, great. It's already a staple in Modern.
Yeah, legacy staple.
Like, yeah, it's already made such a debut. And then they went to tokens right after that.
Yeah.
Like, they printed an FNM.
That is kind of true. They went out on a really high note.
Like, they printed
FNM
Vicious Conquistador, which is like an okay card. It's playable. It's not bad.
Yes.
And then did tokens, it would be like, okay, whatever. That's fine. But no, they went hard with the last one.
So let's say I play this Renegade Rallier, and I don't have Revolt when I play it.
Sure.
But you have Elish Norn.
You bet.
Right? So obviously my thing is going to die.
Uh-huh.
And of course, like, the way it works is it's going to die, just like with like the
That's how I want it.
Well, just like with Eternal Witness before, it's going to die before the triggered ability goes on the stack, right? So do I get to return something in this case? If I play my Renegade Rallier and I don't have Revolt, and it immediately dies due to your Elish Norn, do I get to return something?
Yeah, so looking at this one, my Elish Norn is going to make this Renegade Rallier, as it enters the battlefield, a 1/0 creature.
That's right.
State-based actions are going to tell us this guy's gone. He's going to the graveyard.
He's out.
So his triggered ability, Revolt, triggers whenever, when condition is met, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So that's what we're looking for with Revolt.
Yes.
And before this trigger can even go on the stack, we see this Renegade Rallier die.
Yeah.
So what we said earlier is that, a triggered ability is going to go onto the stack as soon as a player would next receive priority. This Renegade Rallier dies before that, thanks to state-based actions. So everything's going to want to tell me that, well, Revolt triggers. It's going to create its own trigger. However, David is smiling over there.
Yeah.
Because I don't know why you're smiling. This is your card.
I literally just thought of this question today. Stuff makes me excited.
Back to that intervening if, we can see that in this trigger.
Yeah.
When it enters the battlefield, if.
Yeah. So this is a real intervening if clause. No bamboozles.
No heckin' bamboozles here.
This time around.
So Renegade Rallier, at the time that the ability would trigger, must check to see if the condition is met.
Yes.
As David mentioned, he has not had a permanent leave the battlefield this turn, so that condition has not been met. Even though Renegade Rallier is going to die before
I even get to put it on the stack.
Even trigger, even if it did.
Yeah. So let's
This
bring
is
out our friend the fairies and go through exactly the steps that is going to happen when this play goes down. So it's going to go like this. I'm going to play Renegade Rallier, and then the game is going to check for state-based action. I think the fairies do state-based action too. Is that correct?
I want to say.
Yeah. So the fairies do the state-based action. It's like, oh, 0 toughness, get out of here.
Yep.
But before that happens, they have to write something on the whiteboard because a triggered ability has triggered, right? This entering the battlefield is the action that makes them want to write something on the whiteboard. So they go down and they start writing on the whiteboard, and then senior boss fairy, oh no, I didn't have revolt, get out of here. And then they're going to do state-based actions, and then they're going to shuffle Renegade Rallier off to the graveyard. And then they're going to see, okay, any triggered abilities on the whiteboard that we need to put on the stack. And they're going to look, look, we started to write something down, but that ended up not being...
And then it looks like it just squiggled away.
Yeah, so because the intervening if clause was not true at the time the triggered ability triggered, then we do not get to put that triggered ability on the stack. The trigger... intervening if clause has to be true when the triggered ability triggers, and then it also has to be true when when the triggered ability resolves. So it checks again right before it's going to resolve to see, oh, now with stuff like revolt, obviously that doesn't really come into play because, like, obviously if you had something leave the battlefield, you're not going to like have something not have left the battlefield in between the time when it triggers and when it starts to resolve. But like something with like the Felidar Guardian, for example, that one, this Felidar Sovereign, excuse me, that one would, like, if I go below 40 life in response to that trigger, then I'm not going to win the game because the intervening if clause is not true when the ability goes to resolve. And
boy.
Yeah, that is all of the exciting examples that we had prepared for everybody today.
That's all the time we have. We're pushing it today.
Yeah, well, we definitely had a lot of content, but we still have some time. We're going to be around here in the chat for a couple more questions. If anybody has any questions at all about anything that they heard today, any exciting triggered ability questions that they want to throw our way, we can definitely do our best to answer those and make sure everybody understands this topic as much as is possible in a 1 hour session with a couple of guys talking about stuff.
Who maybe know what they're talking about.
Oh, well, I mean, like that would be the idea, right? Like that's the goal.
I think so. They didn't give me the shirt for no reason.
There's some intervening if clauses that might have to be true in that case, though.
We'd also like to know if you have any ideas for future episodes, things that you might not be so sure of. Maybe you want to know a little bit more about missed triggers or understanding you, me, and the IPG.
Ooh, wow, that's a catchy...
I've been thinking about that like all day, and I really wanted to throw that out there. So even if we don't get to an episode here soon...
we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff.
But we'd love to hear from that. If you want to leave it in the chat, or if you want to send us an email at judgingftw@gmail.com.
Yeah.
We want to hear from you because that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, go ahead and scroll down. If you're on Twitch, you should see a panel there that says connect with us. There's all our different social media that's available. It's
That's
all
so
linked
neat.
for you, so you can just like click right on there and go straight to our Twitter or straight to our YouTube video archive. All of the past broadcasts that we have go up on there, and so you can check through there if you would like to see some of our other topics that we've done. But for now, this has been a great night. I hope everybody has a lot of exciting questions about triggered abilities answered, because that's certainly what we're going for. And we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. Our next scheduled broadcast is going to be on March 8th, and we'll be going live at 8 Eastern. But until that time, this has been Dave Eldon and Dalton Grimes. See you next time, everybody. Bye.
Have a good night, y'all.